Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. I believe that you are ready for the third session on outcome based education by Dr. C.V. Kaushik. Let me introduce and welcome Dr. C.V. Kaushik, Director Academics, Sona College of Technology, Salem. Sir holds master degree in textile evaluation and PhD in fiber science from University of Strathclyde, Glasgow, UK. Sir has industrial experience of 15 years and worked in textile industry in Tamil Nadu, Rajasthan and Punjab with 31 years of teaching experience. Sir has over 40 publications in leading national and international journals. Sir has authored and edited 5 textbooks in the area of weaving, chemical processing of textiles, textile testing for Ministry of Textiles, Government of India. He is been an author of manual on soft skills, the student toolbox, a self-developing resource kit for personal and professional excellence. Sir is also co-author of more than 10 manual on various management development topics and editor of a manual on instructional skill development for new teachers. He has served as resource person at a number of Tamil Nadu state and national level human resource training workshops for teaching staff and students. Sir was the Tamil Nadu state facilitator for strategic planning for 5 polytechnic year 1995 to 2000 under the Canada India Institutional Project. He has been involved in strategic planning of educational institute at the state and national level for 10 years and also was director academics at the College of Sona College from 2013 to 2019. Presently, Dr. Kaushik is the principal of Sona College of Technology. Nitte School of Fashion Technology and Interior Design, in association with Bangalore Central University, is honored to welcome Dr. Kaushik for the third session of the third day third day virtual faculty development program with the topic Fashion Design and Approach to Creative Teaching. Now we'll start the session with the topic on outcome-based education. Over to Sir.
A very good afternoon to all of you, all of the participants, the principal of the Nitte School of Fashion Technology and Interior Design, and all the other faculty of the institution and all the participants who have joined this program. A very, very good afternoon to all of you. It's always a pleasure to share with the young people all of my experiences with regard to teacher training, with regard to strategic planning and various other topics. Today's special, of course, is based on outcome-based education, and it's a prime topic of discussion at several fora, and many institutions and universities have taken to outcome-based education. And even the National Board of Accreditation, which is an autonomous body, that organization has also adopted the outcome-based education for its accreditation programs of all engineering programs as well as polytechnic diploma programs. So also, I believe the NAC, who also accredits colleges and universities, definitely NAC is also, though they have not mentioned it explicitly, all of you will definitely stand to gain by having a good knowledge or an overview of outcome-based education, because definitely, though they have not mentioned it explicitly, they will definitely appreciate and give value to all institutions which are following outcome-based education, because it's a very, very effective tool for education, because it promises very successful careers for graduates and also a good success for the teachers and the institution as a whole. Now, as far as my presentation is concerned, before I tell you the topics, are all of you able to hear me clearly? Anybody respond, please? All of you are able to hear me clearly?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So my presentation consists basically of two parts. Of course, the presentation runs from now to about 4:30, but I've split it into two parts, and I probably may go for a very short 5-minute or 3-minute break after the first part. So the first part will consist of two things. One is basic pedagogical skills for engineering teachers, a refresher. When I say engineering, it does not mean only the engineering faculty, it means any teacher who's involved in the teaching profession, including the school teachers. So this PowerPoint I shared recently for an AICT program. That is why it mentions engineering teachers here, but it is applicable to all teachers and definitely applicable to all of you teachers. And this will just be a refresher. There are many aspects involved with regard to basic pedagogical skills for a teacher. And I believe that all teachers must have these skills, practice these skills, get better and better in using these skills so that they emerge as very good teachers and bring about very good learning in their respective institutions. We speak about soft skills for students. We say that soft skills are very important for students because it will help them in their careers. I believe that pedagogical skills for teachers are exactly like soft skills for the students. Pedagogical skills are also a very important way by which a teacher can become successful. A teacher can really make a very good impact on the students, make a good impact ultimately on the society by bringing out very, very good students. So that will give you an overview of several topics. The second part of the second topic of the first part will be outcome-based education and overview. Thereafter, after a very short mini break, a micro break of about 5 minutes, we'll have just course outcomes and how to write them. This is now getting into the nitty-gritty of the teacher's life. How you write course outcomes for your individual courses and how you deal with the various aspects related to course outcomes. Then the second topic in the second part would be the Bloom's taxonomy of instructional outcomes. This is also a very, very important topic with regard to teachers because this will help teachers to develop outcomes that are attuned to the needs of the students. It also helps students develop skills at several levels. We'll look at it in a little more detail in the second part. So now, if all of you can see the slides, I'm moving on to slide number 2. Slide number 2 is here, yes. Basic pedagogical skills for engineering teachers. I like to quote here Cicero with regard to teachers. He says, "What nobler employment or more valuable to the state than that of the man who instructs the rising generation?" Of course, here the word man is used in a very generic way. It does not mean man in the gender sense. It means a human being. He or she who instructs the rising generation. That means we all can be proud of the fact that we are contributing to the happy rise of the next generation by being teachers. So basic pedagogical skills, as I said earlier, is a must for all teachers. So let's now touch upon the ABC, or it's more like the primer of pedagogical skills. The topics here will include instructional planning and content delivery, and then we'll talk a little about effective use of teacher resources. We'll also talk about student or learner-centered instruction. Many other topics. There are many other topics under pedagogical skills for teachers, and I would let the participants do some self-reading by themselves. The internet is an ocean of all the topics, and you can just help yourself. And when you get the time, keep on developing yourself and learning more and more. First, we'll talk about the instructional planning and content delivery strategies. First, I'll tell you what the instructional planning, we'll talk first about teaching methods, and then we'll talk later about the teaching aids, as they call it. Before that, I'll just like to tell you the key to success. Obviously, it is good planning. I'm sure all of you are very much engaged in the process of planning. And for those new teachers who are new to this profession, I like to give them some tips here on how they can plan a lesson, individual lesson, and plan even for their entire course. So good planning ensures the right allocation of time to each topic. Very often in a classroom, when you start delivering a topic, perhaps without planning, you don't know whether you have talked about a related topic in an earlier class or not. But if you have very good planning, you make sure that you are giving time, specific time for each of your topics, and you are able to ensure that you are not giving unnecessary overlap of subjects or lessons or bringing about repetition of what you've said earlier. It helps the teacher to use appropriate teaching methods and teaching aids. We'll talk about selecting appropriate teaching methods very briefly, but I may not be touching too much upon teaching aids because I think today teachers are so adept at using the internet and various other resources that I think they will be well attuned to using a number of teaching aids. A good planning also provides for the inclusion and provision of suitable learning activities, which will ensure that the students are learning well. You need to plan the precise or apt activities that you want to have in every class, because that should be related to the topic and related to how well you can use those activities in a classroom. So that's also very important and enhances the trainer's confidence in the abilities to teach. As you get better and better with the very good planning every day, you get more close to becoming what is known as an ideal teacher. And then you find yourself doing the right things right the first time, every time, which is my quality mantra in just 10 few words. In fact, I would call this as a very succinct way of describing total quality management. You do the right things. You do it the first time. First, select the right things to do it right the first time, and do that every time. So you'll always be on the right side. How can a teacher be effective? By writing very good learning outcomes, by selecting the right teaching methods and teaching aids and teaching learning activities, and also by deciding how to ensure how to consolidate learning on the part of the learner so that you can monitor it well and what resources you can use. So what are the guidelines for instructional planning? You need to first look at the basic teaching model. It has got 4 discrete parts. And as always, it begins with instructional outcomes or learning outcomes. We look at outcomes in some more detail, but everything with regard to outcome-based education begins with outcomes. What you like to see at the end of the learning process, what you like the students to demonstrate at the end of the learning process, what you like them to know at the end of the teaching process. Then, having written the learning outcomes, you need to identify the entering behavior. Entering behavior is what the student knows before entering the class, the level of knowledge of the student as he or she enters the class, particularly on the topic that you're about to present. If it is something that you have already told them, they should already have a prerequisite knowledge of something. That will be the entering behavior. If not, whatever they have learned in their previous years, that would be the entering behavior. And then once you're aware of that, or you have clarified that to the students and you are ensured that all of them have the right entering behavior, you move on to the development of instructional procedures. How you're going to plan everything within the classroom, what teaching methods you'd use, what aids you'd use, what are the activities you do, what question answers you would do in the classroom, how would you handle questions. All of that will constitute the instructional procedures. And once the learning process, the teaching learning process has come to an end, you want to assess the performance of students. In other words, you want to assess to the extent to which the student has learned. And if you find that the students have learned well, so that they are able to meet the outcome that you started with, all is well. If you find that the student performance is not well, you need to go back. First, look at your instructional procedures to see whether there's anything lacking there, anything that you have missed. If you find everything all right, you need to check whether all the students have the right entering behavior for learning the topic that you wanted to present. If that is too okay, you need to see whether your learning outcomes are right. So this, you keep going back and forth to the previous stages, all these other feedback loops, until you find that the students are able to achieve the learning outcomes that you started with. So this is the basic teaching model that all teachers must practice, whether at whatever level, school, college, any level at all. Now, coming down to the actual classroom and planning for the classroom, you want to plan for a particular lesson. A lesson is, of course, a unit of matter, a unit of knowledge, unit of skills that you want to teach in one period or one session. So it has four important parts: introduction, development, consolidation, and evaluation and follow-up. Let's look at what is the content or what is the purpose of each of these parts. And also we'll see what strategies can be used to have a good introduction and so on. The purpose of introduction, it arouses interest and focuses student attention on the topic. So when you introduce the topic, you want to tell them about the topic, and then you want to ensure that you arouse the interest and get their attention to what you want to tell them. You clearly spell out the expected learning outcomes. You tell them that at the end of this class, you would like or you would expect students to be able to do this, to be able to demonstrate this, and so on. In short, what the lesson is all about. It also, the introduction will motivate learners. In other words, you need to most importantly tell them why the lesson is useful. Very often, students will get distracted or will tune off from your class if they do not know what is the purpose of the lesson, how it will be useful for them, for their career, for their learning, for their knowledge, and for their skills, and so on. So you need to motivate them by telling them why this lesson is important, how it is connected to either something they are about to learn or how it is connected to their career, etc. Introduction will also review the previous lesson relevant to the present session. So this is what I said, the entering behavior. So you need to review that very, very briefly during your introduction. It tells students what entry behavior is expected. You touch upon that as well. You also give an overview of the lesson. You tell them in brief what you will be doing with the lesson, the parts, the contents. Relates current lesson to previous lesson. You have to tell them that too. And then you may also include how the lesson is going to be taught. What are your strategies? What are the strategies for motivating students during the introduction? Establish a positive relationship with students in the beginning of the class, which means, of course, that you need to make sure that the students are comfortable with the topic. It's not right if you tell the student that what they're going to learn is very difficult. Many students have not done very well in this topic in the past. They've not been able to solve problems and so on. Or that this topic is being included in the syllabus, but it's not really important. Those kind of things will not help you to have positive relationships. Make sure that the student is brought into or drawn into your topic. Give practical examples with regard to your topic and real life applications. You can even tell them a story with regard to the use of that particular topic and how it has been useful in somebody's life. Inform students about job opportunities, about the skills taught in the classroom. Encourage and respond to questions with sincerity. Don't put down any question, however simple they may be, however fundamental or elementary they may be. And try to use humor in the class, because students are here to learn. They like to learn in a happy environment. Keep them happy by having some humor in the classroom, and definitely that humor must be related to your topic. And this is what you need to think about before you come to your classroom as well. If it's something unrelated, they may tune off. Get the attention of the students through anecdotes, stories, a startling statistic, or a cartoon. Give an overview of the topic. These are called attention grabbers. This, in the introduction, all these methods are called attention grabbers. Give an overview of the topic. Create confidence in students about their ability to learn. You tell them that all of them can definitely learn the topic that you're about to present. Ask interesting, arousing questions, and then stimulate a short discussion among learners. You just have a discussion among learners about the topic even before you teach or during the introduction itself, so that you can find out the kind of discussions, and you can use some of the points you get for your introduction. Use the chalk and board as a focus of attention. Present a case. If you have a case, do present the case, because that becomes like a story related to the topic. Now, this is the second phase. The second phase is called development. What is the purpose of development? This is the real core of your class session, your lesson. This is the real instructional phase. It presents the subject matter for easy absorption and retention by students. And ideally, you can have 4 to 5 teaching points. Later on, when I talk very briefly about presentation skills, I've also mentioned about having an introduction, a body, and then a conclusion. So make sure your body contains 4 to 5 teaching points, the main points of your lesson. How do you use this part, the development phase? What strategies you can use? You plan activities so that students are alternately passive, listening and watching, and they're also active. You give them some problems, you help them to write something or discuss something, they talk, they use equipment, and so on. All this will relate to the topic that you use. You can't use all of them. It will relate precisely to the topic that you have in mind. Use gestures. A very important aspect of body language is using gestures. Very often, sometimes your every word that you utter may not be heard clearly by the students, but based upon the gesture that you use, the things you do with your two hands, your facial expressions, all that will convey meaning to the student. Provide extra help for students who have difficulty. You definitely, as regularly you're going to the classroom, you will definitely find students who have some problem with learning. Try to see how you can help them. Arouse and kindle students' desire to learn by using visuals, examples, eye-to-eye contact with the students, a pleasant voice, and by connecting students' experiences with the content. All this is very much related to presentation skills. Eye-to-eye contact is very, very important. Even if there are some 50 students in class, make sure you're looking at all of the students row by row and looking at their eyes to make sure that you are definitely making them feel a part of your presentation. If you were to focus on only one set of students and not really focus on another set of students, that may cause some problems with the latter set. Give tips for effective learning. Use mnemonics or give them learning tips. Use learner-centered approaches such as brainstorming, discussion, and seminars. Very often you can get very good points from the discussion by two students, break them into small groups, and then have one of them present the summary of what they discussed. And from those you can collect some good points. So that would constitute learner-centered approach. You're giving the students the opportunity to learn by themselves. Use small groups for sharing concerns, solving problems, and working out on assignments. So these are some strategies for the main phase of your presentation. Then you have your consolidation phase. Here you give students an opportunity to transfer their knowledge and skills to new situations. You give them some problem, you give them such a situation, you give them some case study, and then you get them to work out the solution or come out with the answers or conclusions. So that will help them not only to practice, but it will reinforce their learning. The greater they practice, the greater this one. This is quite related sometimes to what we call the tutorial class. Very often after the excuse me, after a teaching part, after a class, you normally organize a tutorial where you want to give students opportunity to practice some problems. This is related to mainly courses like mathematics or courses like design and so on. It can be very much applicable even to your fashion technology, where you can design patterns for new designs and new styles and so on. Strategies for motivating students: get them actively involved in learning by having them work in small groups, give them assignments and activities, draw summary from students by questioning. When you question students, they come up with answers. Use some of those answers as your points for summary. Repeat the main points of the lesson for emphasis. The idea here is to involve the students as much as possible so that they are with you right through the lesson. Repeat the main points of the lesson for emphasis. Use group assignments. Make sure that they're able to learn as a group. If there are some very good students, they might transfer their knowledge to the other students, and that's how learning can take place. Peer learning, peer teaching takes place in group assignments. Encourage shy or passive students to answer questions, but don't embarrass them. Don't make them feel that they are being singled out for questions. Just leave them, make them feel happy, and help them to see how they can learn. Use the chalkboard or whiteboard for summary, or you give them a prepared handout. Encourage students to work cooperatively together. Very often peer teaching, or as I said, peer teaching or peer coaching goes a long way in helping other students who are shy. This is the last part, evaluation and follow-up. I think all of you will be very familiar with this. Once we have taught the lesson, we need to know the extent to which the learning objectives have been achieved. You can do that by giving them homework or assignments. And then you can provide time for giving for students to get their doubts clarified. When they've submitted their homework, you can call them over to your desk and then discuss certain points that they need clarification on. Then you also prepare students for the next lesson by evaluating the extent to which they've already learned your lesson. Use novelty and variety. Don't use the same method of giving the problem. You have a quiz in the class, or you divide them into groups. You get students, one group to ask questions to the other group, and then so on. So have some novelty and variety that creates some positive participation as well as some positive competition inside the classroom. Give questions that can be answered only by talking with others. Textbook answers are less interesting than activity-oriented ones. Students do best when they are in a group. So make sure that they need to talk the answers out by discussing with each other. Motivational strategies for the last phase. How do you motivate students? You need to reward them for their performance. A very good student who attends all your classes can be rewarded. Best assignment, best improved performance, and so on. Give them tips for the end examination. Guide students who have problems. Give students frequent feedback. This is very important. Giving feedback is very important to student learning, and this can be done in the last stage when you are giving them the test and you want to give them feedback. Help them to learn, basically. Do not give them any negative reinforcement or negative feedback. Encourage students to take action by asking for examples. Ask them to teach with others, peer teaching, as I mentioned. Apply what they have learned. Give them case studies, problems, real-life problems or simulated problems. Plan assignments which are suitable for the lesson and challenge the students. Don't give them very easy problems because they'll all do it, but in the test, Perhaps in some cases where somebody else has the question paper, they might be faced with some more difficult questions. Give them questions which challenge them. And this is how you summarize the planning for a whole lesson, the lesson number, the name of the topic, whether theory or lab, instructional, the aids and facilities, what aids you're going to use, what teaching methods you're going to use. This is our next topic, so I'll give you more information on teaching methods. And then, of course, the bridging. You tell them the objectives of your class, the outcomes, and state the rationale, the reason, most important. The two important steps of bridging is introduction. Tell them about the learning outcomes, and tell them what is the purpose of the lesson. Give them a pre-test. As the class is going on, you can give them a pre-test with informal questions. Even before you have talked about the topic, you can help the teacher to find out the entering behavior as well. So you need to prepare some questions for the entering behavior. And then participatory techniques would include question sessions, group discussions, brainstorming. I'll tell you about brainstorming a little later in the next part, in the next topic here itself. Post-test, of course, will be a formal pre-scheduled test related to the lesson. And lastly, of course, you can also include in your plan your own objective as a teacher. A teacher would do excellently well to set personal objectives, especially with regard to student learning and academic performance. You can tell yourself, okay, when I'm done with my class and I'm very happy about it, I should see 90% of my students achieve the learning outcomes and getting at least 70 or 75% in their evaluation, in their test performance. That kind of a thing will motivate teachers. You also would try to do very well to plan your lesson very well in order to achieve it. So an outline of presentation skills. There's only one slide. Actually, this is a 3 to 4 hours or even 5 hours workshop, but I'm just going to give you one slide to tell you the basic skeleton of what presentation skills is all about. With presentation skills, you need to know 3 things. How you look in a class, that means how you dress, how you look. You need to present yourself well. And then what you say, how well you have organized your content, in other words. And lastly, the third one is how you use your voice. These are the 3 key features of any presentation. How you look, what you say, and how you use your voice. So obviously the content is very important here. Introduction, body, conclusion. We have mentioned this earlier in our previous topic just now. So you can use that. Even in an extempore speech, when you have a function and you need to make a very brief talk, even of 5 minutes, you can follow these steps. Introduction, body, and conclusion. Just usually it's a good technique to have 3 basic points wherever you do a presentation, a quick presentation. Point number 1, point number 2, and point number 3, and then you conclude. Simple language, pronunciation, articulation. They always say use the language of the audience, which means don't use bombastic language. Make sure you're able to communicate with students well. They're able to understand every word that you say in your class. As I said, and of course, pronunciation is important. If you have difficulty with any word, look up the dictionary or talk to somebody who's good in pronunciation and find out the correct pronunciation of the words. Because remember, you're a teacher there. Students look upon you as a role model. They're learning from you. So you need to make sure you have the correct pronunciation of all the terms, all the words that you use in the classroom. Articulation, clarity. Every word that you utter in the classroom must be heard clearly by the student. Eye contact, I mentioned this earlier. Make sure all of your students feel that you have included them in your presentation. Gestures, what you do with your hands, what you do with your face as well. and posture, the way you stand. You cannot be too pompous, you cannot be too erect, you cannot be slouching. You need to have a comfortable gait. Look friendly. The best posture is one in which you're looking very friendly. And you need to use your face for that. Use voice to good effect. Using your voice to good effect means you can practice by yourself in front of a mirror. You can practice in front of your good friend who gives you feedback on your voice. Modulate your voice well. Raise it when necessary. Lower it when required. Okay? So use your voice to good effect. When you want to emphasize a point, either raise it or you sometimes lower it. I mentioned in an earlier presentation that one of my role models for this is Amitabh Bachchan. If you listen to his presentations, you get a very good example of voice modulation. Overcoming stage fear. All of us have stage fear, believe it or not. Young people, people with some experience, people who have lots of experience, all of them have stage fear. It is the extent to which they show their stage fear that counts. Experienced people don't show their stage fear because of their experience. Whereas young people sometimes may tend to do something, they may do something not really right. So you need to practice this. Practice your presentation privately, either to yourself in the front of a mirror or with a friend, to make sure that you get more and more confident. And once you get to the stage, you're so confident that you forget about all your fear. Asking and responding to questions. When you ask questions, ask them very politely. Here, of course, even responding to questions, you have to do it very politely. Don't make the person who is asking the question feel very small or feel very bad for asking the question. Make them feel comfortable. Even if the question is a little out of the way, just make them feel comfortable and respond to it in a very polite, positive way. Practice makes perfect. Anything in life, unless you practice, you can't make it perfect. It's for all walks of life, whatever you do in life. So with regard to being teachers, you need to practice your presentations so that they are perfect. Moving on to the next topic, here we have instructional methods and instructional aids. Here's a list of the commonly used instructional methods or teaching methods. I'm sure all of you are familiar with these methods. We use them so often as a teacher, but I'm going to give you a very brief definition of each of these words, each of these methods, and also tell you where they are used. And ultimately conclude this topic with how you can select the right teaching method for different situations. Obviously, you can't use the lecture method for all situations. The last here are the more recent ones. Self-directed study, you have Coursera, you have all these other online platforms from where you can register for a course and learn everything by yourself. The correspondence courses or the distance education programs and courses. Computer aided, you use a computer-based teaching package, you put it into your computer and it'll give you instructions to learn the topic, project work and so on. These are all you're familiar with, definitely. Role play and of course games are all mostly used in the management field, where they want to teach some topics. It's used less frequently in a technical session. So in technical sessions, all the other ones are used. Even a case study is very much used, brainstorming, drill and practice, project work, and these are all used in technical courses and programs. A lecture is a presentation of information by a teacher to students with or without the use of teaching aids. Usually, you find in a lecture, the student has very little opportunity to interact, although there might be a session for asking questions. Or if you feel as a presenter, you can tell them, stop me anytime and ask me any question. What is it used for? Giving information reach large groups and thus save time. Introduce a new topic or recent developments. It can be used for communicating rules, regulations, policies. As a classroom coordinator, you will want to tell them about certain changes in the rules of assessment or changes in the rules or regulations of the college or certain policies that the principal has communicated all of you with, you need to tell the students. You can use the lecture format. You can use the lecture session for summarizing. When you're done with all your teaching aids, when you're done with all your other models and everything, you stand up in front of the classroom and then you just summarize the main points of the lesson. That would be a lecture method. Demonstration, all of you are aware of this, a process where students learn by observing an expert perform skill or procedure. You're the expert there. When you show how to do certain things, the students will see you and learn from that. It's used to master new skills and procedures, turn theory into practice. Whatever you have been saying in the classroom is now, it gives students an opportunity to practice that. It stimulates interest and keeps students' attention because they're seeing something new, some new model, new machine, new equipment, something new to learn. So it kindles their interest. You're showing them how to do things, and thereby you involve the students. You're all aware of GD. Many of you young teachers would have got your jobs even through going through a group discussion. In a classroom situation, you give them, the focus would be on the technical topic that you're presenting in a classroom. Technical or other management topic or any other topic that's part of your syllabus. So it's used to, it's a verbal exchange of ideas and opinions on a particular subject. It takes advantage of the knowledge and experience of the students, involves students, achieve higher level outcomes, improve creative thinking and decision-making skills. This is a way by which you can induce learner-centered instruction. That means you give students, you share with students the opportunity to learn by themselves, and they come out with very good ideas, very good methods, very good way of doing things. Develop teamwork skills. It helps them also to talk and thereby develop their communication skills. Seminar is a discussion where students present a paper on a given topic or to the class for discussion and analysis. This also is practiced frequently in colleges, so I'm sure you have all used it. It helps students to become independent learners, promote leadership skills. Why independent learners? You've just given them the topic. They go into the library, they go into the internet to check more about the topic that you have given them. They do some researching, select the very good ideas, select very good material, compile them, and then get ready for the presentation. So at the end of the day, that topic they have been able to learn independently without any help, except some facilitation from the teacher. It promotes leadership skills. They can decide what to select, what not to select. They can take charge of a group and do a presentation, so it improves their leadership skills, practice presentation skills, and develop their analytical skills. While compiling the presentation, they decide what to include, what not to include, whether this is right, this is not right. They like to do some analysis of what they have collected and then decide upon the best. A field trip, commonly called industrial visit or IV by the students and colleges. A field trip is planned visit by the class to a location outside the college. They expose students to resources in business and industry and the community not available in the classroom or labs. It is used to bring realism to teaching. In a classroom, you can only do so much. You can't bring them the real thing unless you can show them a model of something. But if you have to show them the real thing, you need to go out of your college and then take them to industry where they see the process or the equipment for real. Increase student motivation because they like to watch, they like to learn things by themselves. They are thinking about careers in that line, so it motivates them. reinforces classroom learning. It adds to what you've said in the class, and it provides first-hand experience. Again, it provides an opportunity for learner-centered instruction. They like to see, watch, and learn. Drill and practice. Again, practice in colleges is a repetition of a skill or procedure under the guidance of a teacher. I mentioned earlier about a tutorial, a topic like mathematics or a topic like some designing or a topic like drawing or sketching. You might want to have drill and practice. It's simply used to develop their skills. They know what to do it. They want to gain expertise as they go through the process of drill and practice. Brainstorming is a process to generate as many ideas as possible in a short time. All ideas are recorded without evaluation. That's one of the key features of brainstorming. All ideas are allowed. Another term for brainstorming in the West is green lighting. At a traffic signal, when there's a green light, everybody is allowed to pass, irrespective of the mode of transport. Similarly, when you announce a topic, it's green lighting time. Everybody is allowed to come out with ideas. So all ideas are recorded without evaluation. When everybody is exhausted of ideas, you can go round 1, round 2, round 3, till everybody says pass. And then you discuss each of the ideas, discuss the merits and demerits, and pick out the best, shortlist the best. It's used to actively involve a total group, solve difficult problems, use expertise of the group, encourage creative thinking, and create enthusiasm amongst group. Very often when you're about to solve a problem, sometimes the students can come up with a very creative way of solving that problem. One of the drawbacks of problem brainstorming is is restricted to a smaller group, say up to about 20. It cannot be done in a class of 60 because there are too many ideas and too many things to discuss. It may take a long time to come out with in a nutshell, the best ideas. Case study is another teaching method describing a situation, real or imagined, and ends with a problem or issue for the student to solve. So here you give them either a real problem which you have discussed with your industry associate, and you've got a real industry problem which you present to the student, or you simulate one, you create one, you imagine an industry problem, and then you create a case and then present it to a student for solving. You ask them questions at the end. It presents a sample of real life in slow motion. Why in slow motion? Because they can read the case study many times. In real life, they can't do that. Whereas in a case study, they can go through the case, familiarize themselves with the real nature of the problem, the issues that have to be tackled, and then they can come up with ideas to solve the problems or answer the questions you have given. Develop problem-solving skills. Expose students to diverse problems and situations. Improve problem-solving skills. Develop and improve. Developing is something, improving is something else. Improve communication skills because they are able to write out solutions to cases. Change students' attitude. They are looking at life in a more realistic way. They are looking at something that they will be seeing in the future as a part of their real life. So it changes their attitude and makes them a little more serious towards life. With regard to their career, I mean. Expose students to current practices in business and industry. Apply theory to practice. So case study is something that it can be used very often, even in a technical course. You can use a case study to find out how well students have learned. For example, I believe you talk about industrial engineering, you talk about designing of garments. All those cases related to them can be used for helping students to learn. Games. These are said mainly used for management. Simulation that presents simplified models of reality within which students can apply their knowledge and skills according to specific rules. Every game has a rule, so they get the practice of following rules when they have to do something. It creates a risk-free environment. In real life, there are risks, whereas here it's a game, so it's risk-free, so that they can try out their new skills, demonstrate the benefits of cooperation and teamwork. It demonstrates alternate problem-solving strategies, demonstrate the consequences of poor judgment and performance. So they can get better and better at getting the strategies right by playing games related to certain topics like decision making, risk taking. All these are topics that are used for students to learn. Now, we have seen a host of methods. We haven't covered all of them. I've covered most of the ones that are used in classrooms. So here we have a continuum from one end of the scale to the other. And I like to see here or tell you or share with you the amount of control that you have in using these methods. When I say degree of control, I mean, what is the degree of control of the learning aspect that you have with each of these methods? With a lecture session, you have entire control because students will do exactly as you tell them to do. They will not have opportunity to really think for themselves or act for themselves. Then you move on to the demonstration. And then, of course, related to a tutorial, if it's a theory class or mathematics and so on, this is for a practical session where they need to learn, use equipment or machines. So this here, you share a part of it. Students learn to some extent by themselves. Your control is less here than with the lecture. With lab work and workshop practice, you lose still more because students do the entire work here and you just watch. Here you are doing everything and students are watching. Here the students do everything and you just watch. So still less control. In a group discussion seminar, the student has done a lot of talking and you're again just an observer. The student is trying to learn everything by himself as much as he can. Team teaching. When there are 2 or 3 people in a classroom, they share the teaching. So there also, the teacher who's an observer in such a situation does not really say much. They just observe and give comments, 1 or 2 comments in between. Computer-aided instruction, absolutely little control because except those instructions given along with the manual or along with the DVD for this particular course. Here the student learns everything using a DVD entirely by himself or herself. Project work. The students as a group, they do the project completely with very, very minimal instructions or guidance from the teacher. Self-directed study is taking a course online. So here at this end, you have the lowest degree of control. So the continuum moves from the highest degree of control to the lowest degree. So, as I was mentioning earlier about learner-centered instruction, today the practice is to move slowly from this side towards this side. And that is why very often in every program, we encourage students to select a course from some reputed universities or reputed bodies which offer very good quality online courses. You encourage students to register for those courses. They learn by themselves and then they even get a certificate from them, and then the credits, related credits, you can add them to the credits of their regular program. So this is how we are moving from highest degree of control to lower and lower degree of control to encourage learner-centered instruction or student-centered instruction, which is very, very important for real life. In the NBA, when we talk about outcome-based education, they use a term called lifelong learning. The more the students are allowed to practice with the learner-centered instruction, the greater they will tend towards lifelong learning in their real life, which means they will be in a position to face a problem, to learn, to go to the library, look up situations, learn from them, try to solve the problem, and so on. So everything they do, they'll be following the self-directed instruction, and they will be able to practice more and more of lifelong skills. Okay? Now this table, I'm not going to go through in detail. You can read it for yourself when you have the time. It gives all the teaching purposes here. You have different situations here where you need to teach students, and here you have all the teaching methods that we have just discussed. And it rates each of them in on a scale of 1 to 3, or let's say 3 to 1. 3 is good and 1 is least preferable. For example, when you want to give information, demo is the last method you'll take up. The best way to do that would be a lecture and so on. You can check it out. I'll just give you one or two examples to help you learn how to select. For example, here you have a situation 1. You are in charge of identifying topics for a seminar, for a paper presentation for a state-level inter-college student symposium. Remember, you're the teacher, this is a student symposium, and you've been assigned with the task of identifying topics for paper presentation. And you've been given a group of 20 students who can organize that event for paper presentation. So the question is, how would you bring about the most creative ideas from your students, volunteers, and prepare a list of topics? So you have 20 students, you need to identify topics for paper presentation. Lecture may not be so good because there are very few students. So one of the good ideas would be to have a brainstorming. Get ideas from these 20 students, put them all down in a list, and when all have exhausted their ideas, you discuss idea by idea and select the one that is most related to the title of the symposium, and then you can shortlist ideas. Another way of doing it is to divide these 20 students into 5 groups, 4 or 5 groups, and have them discuss separately the topics, and each one member from each group summarizes and gives them their final list from which you can come up with topics. Similarly, there's another situation. All these are like simulated, but it can happen in real life. A manufacturing company approaches your department with a request to train a team of 5 of their trainees on the working and use of a high-end machine in your lab. For example, you have a digitizer in your lab, and then there's a company, a garment manufacturing company, which says, okay, I want you to train 5 of our trainees on the digitizer and how you use it for designing or whatever else. So how do you organize this? Obviously, a lecture is not going to help. You have a device, you have only 5 trainees, so it's like a lab class. You would use a demonstration session. You'd show them the parts of the digitizer, you'd show them the features of the digitizer and how you go about using the digitizer. And once you've done that, you'd let these trainees, you'd let them practice it. So drill and practice. So this is how for each situation or each learning situation or teaching situation, you can identify the most appropriate method. Here's one more. You have been requested to strengthen the knowledge of a group of 75 students in solving problems in industrial engineering, in garment manufacture, in preparation for placement. Remember, this topic is already taught in their curriculum, but this is just before placement. You want to refresh their knowledge. You want to brush up their knowledge in solving problems. So the best way would be splitting them into 3 batches and then giving them tutorials. You can't have a tutorial with 75 students. You have 3 individual students. You can take the help of 2 other faculty, and then you can have 1 faculty in each session, and then you can do a tutorial. You can give them simulated or real-time problems, and then you can see the way they solve it, help them learn, and then they will practice, thereby drill and practice. You give them more and more problems so that they are ready for the placement interviews. Lastly, of course, as a teacher of a particular management subject in textiles, you need to strengthen students' understanding of decision making and negotiation skills. What would be two effective methods for doing this? So you need to, these are two management topics, and you need to strengthen their knowledge, understanding. So the best way would be to give them cases. You give them cases, real ones or simulated ones, and then you see how well they're able to answer the questions that you give them. Or you can involve them in role play. You can give them a case where there is an MD, there is a chairman, there is a production manager, there is a sales manager, there is a customer, and so on. So each student plays one role, and then you give them the case. And then each one of them plays their role, and you just as an observer, you watch and tell them how they are learning the skill of decision making, negotiation, and so on. So you can see that in this method, what used in this exercise, what is the method that's been used in this exercise? I have made an attempt now to give you certain situations so that you can learn to decide upon the best teaching method. So what method have I used here? Obviously, it's the case study method. I've given you different cases. I'm asking you to answer the questions that are related to it. The next topic is instructional or teaching aids. As I mentioned earlier, all of you teachers are today more adept at using all of these aids. So we'll see in the next subtopic here about learning styles, and you'll see how well you'll find the need to use one or more of these teaching aids. Learner-centered instruction. I've been talking quite a bit about learner-centered instruction. Consists of two parts or two topics: learning styles and learning skills. Each one of us is a learner, whatever our age, and when we learn something, we have our own individual style, which is unique to us. Similarly, your classroom, your students, each one of them will have a particular learning style. We'll talk about different learning styles and how you can identify those styles and what are the characteristics of those styles. We'll also talk about a few learning skills and why they are important to a student for learning. I mentioned earlier, there's a difference between teacher-centered instruction and learner-centered instruction, also called instructor-centered. Teacher-centered instruction, the teacher or instructor takes full responsibility of what and how much a student learns. Remember when you learnt in your school? Of course, schools today are also changing the way of teaching. They're moving towards this learner-centered, but in the earlier days, whenever teacher tells you something, the class, that's it, that's law. Whatever she tells you to learn, that's it. That's what you learn, nothing more, nothing less. So, entirely controlled by the teacher. The full responsibility is that of the teacher. So, nowadays, it's found that learner-centered instruction is more realistic. It helps students to develop better as learners in life, because in real life, you have to work through your life by learning through your situations and by gaining more and more experience through life. In learner-centered instruction, the teacher or instructor shares the responsibility of learning with the students. We saw the continuum. In today's context, student-centered learning is increasingly being recommended and practiced for long-term student development, lifelong learning. We are moving from here to here. Of course, we are still moving. We haven't completely done away with this. Probably there are still some places where the teacher controls all. Let's look at learning styles. Learning styles are defined as the ways in which people prefer to take in new information and make it a part of their knowledge and skills. As a teacher, when you're presenting a topic, you have a mix of different kinds of students. Each of them has their own learning styles. So the way in which they take in whatever you say and make it a part of their permanent learning, is what you call the learning styles. And experts in the field have done a lot of research and found that most people, there are many learning styles, maybe I think around a dozen learning styles, but they have found that most of us fall into three major categories. And the three major categories are visual learners, auditory learners, and kinesthetic learners. Let's take a look at each one of these. But before that, let's see what is learning and what are some principles of learning which have been identified and discovered by experts in the field of learning. Learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior resulting from reinforced practice. Learning is a process through which a person gains new knowledge, skills, or attitude. This is easy to understand. You want to cause a relatively permanent change in behavior. That means before learning, the student did not know to do something. After learning, the student now knows how to do something. So that's the change in behavior that you're causing. And that comes with reinforced practice. Very simply, it means when a student gains new knowledge, skills, or attitudes, it's a process of learning. Principles of learning. Students learn more quickly and easily when they can integrate new ideas with what they already know. Active participation in the teaching learning process is a prerequisite for learning. That's why I said in the introduction, you need to tell them why they have to learn something, what is their entering behavior. If you do not involve students in the teaching learning process, little learning will take place in a classroom. The greater the number of activities in a classroom, the greater the amount of learning. And all this has to be planned well beforehand. You can't go to a classroom and suddenly offhand give some activities. That would not be in good keeping with teaching practice. Different learning outcomes require different from appropriate instructional methods. That you'll be seeing when I show you the learning styles of students. Learners differ in the way in which they learn and the rate at which they learn. Individual differences or learning styles. Wide range of learning experiences are to be provided to meet individual needs. Because we all have different learning styles, and because in a class, students will have different learning styles, we need to use different learning experiences to enable all of them to meet their own individual needs of learning. Motivated students learn effectively. You don't need to motivate a very good student very often. They can learn by themselves because they are already self-motivated. Repetitive practice is essential for good learning. This is key not only to technical courses, but as I said, to anything in life. A sportsman, a musician, instrumentalist, anybody require to practice before learning it well. Appealing to many senses relieves boredom of the learner and heightens attention. You normally use the sense of sight and the sense of hearing in a classroom because you're showing something or they're listening to your talk. But you can also appeal to the other senses by showing them, for example, in textiles, we show different kinds of fabrics or different textures of fabrics. And by the sense of feel, they're able to identify certain fabrics. So you appeal to other senses. In a chemistry classroom, for example, you can use a sense of smell to identify certain gases that come out from some chemical reactions. Adolescents learn better when they know how they can use what they are learning. This is what I said. The purpose of your teaching must be known. The topic, the importance of the topic must be emphasized in the introduction itself. Similarities between instructional event and actual tasks, jobs lead to greater transfer of learning, which means that whatever you teach in the classroom must have greater resemblance, as close a resemblance as possible to the real thing in industry or business, so that it makes it easier for them to learn well. If there's too wide a gap, when they go to industry and see the real process or real equipment, they might be at a loss. Adolescents learn better through group discussion, seminar, demonstration, hands-on practice. We have already mentioned that earlier. Students learn best by doing. The amount of learning increases with repeated performance. That's why we have tutorial classes, we have practice sessions, we have laboratory classes, and so on. We make them do it. We give them seminars, we give them group discussions. All these techniques are helping students to learn best by doing it themselves. As Nike says, just do it. Spaced or distributed recalls are more advantages in fixing material that is to be retained for a long time. If you have a long list of things for them to learn, give it to them in parts. Tell them the first 5 things they need to learn, tell them the importance. In the next class, tell them 5 more, and so on. So you space their or distribute their recalls so that they learn better. This is important, very, very important. Feedback. Students learn more efficiently when they are provided with feedback about whether or not and to what degree they have learned and how accurately they have learned. And as I mentioned earlier, positive feedback or positive reinforcement facilitates learning. A student can never learn if there is continuously a negative reinforcement in his class or lab. Now, let's continue on this topic and go to the characteristics of the styles. Now, why is it important for you to know the styles? Your success as a teacher will depend on the extent to which you can create a teaching and learning environment that focuses on the needs of your students. This is where we talk about styles. A well-designed curriculum and effective teachers will not, I repeat, will not produce high student achievement unless you have a knowledge about their learning styles and the students have developed effective learning skills. So a good curriculum and great effective teaching alone will not help. You need to tune your teaching methods and your classroom activities to help cater to different learning styles in the class, and also to help students to use their learning skills well. Let's look at column 1 here. Visual. We have seen 3 kinds of styles: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. Let's look at this one first. Visual learners learn by watching, seeing, or imaging. Even as you talk, they are visualizing about whatever you're saying. They are imagining. They are creating a picture in their mind of what you're trying to present. If you're showing them a picture, well and good. But if you're not, if you're just talking, they create a picture in their own mind and try to learn from that. Visual disorder may distract them. They tend to be quiet, neat, orderly, well-planned, and organized. So if you're taking something to a classroom which is for visual learners, you make sure it is well prepared and very neatly laid out so that it doesn't distract those learners. I'm going to the next slide to show you more of visual learners. Then we'll come back to this slide again. Visual learners mainly focus on details rather than on the whole task, doodling or finding something to watch. Very often, a visual learner, if you're not presenting something visual and you're simply talking in the class or giving them a lecture, very often some students may be taking notes, or they may even just be drawing something meaningless. That's called doodling. If you're scribbling something on a pad meaninglessly, it's called doodling. So they might be doing that, but because that's what it helps them to learn, whatever you're trying to help them to learn. They remember faces rather than names. You might have one of the students come up to you and say, or you might come across a person whom you say, oh, I think I know your face very well. I've seen you before, but I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name. Can you just tell me your name? If you're a visual learner. May need to write facts down in order to recall them. As I said, learners, visual learners will like to take down notes as you talk so that they can recall them. Going back to the previous slide, auditory learners. They learn mainly by hearing, learn through listening and talking. They even enjoy talking even to themselves. And while learning, they may even vocalize silently. Some students, if you have noticed, when they are learning something, they are memorizing something or learning something, they're mumbling something to themselves. That's vocalizing silently. Or you might see them moving their lips, but you can't really hear what they are saying. You might just hear a incoherent mumble. Sometimes moving their lips or humming. They like listening to dialogue but avoid long descriptions. They remember names, not faces. They tend to focus on the whole, sometimes missing details, may choose to solve problems by talking them through. Rather than write down something, they would like to discuss by talking a problem. Then the last kind of learners, kinesthetic, doing. They learn best through physical process of touching or moving. They like to perform procedures for themselves, are action oriented and remember better when they can physically involve in the learning process. Very often, such students in the classroom, they might just be looking absent minded or they might be even fidgeting. They are doing something that you might not like. They might be fidgeting. Fidgeting means bringing about a physical activity that is not related to their body language, related to learning whatever you're talking about. So they need to move often. They may change their posture while sitting and so on. They and words with gestures. So these kind of students, you need to take them to a situation where they can actually do the task. So they will learn better. So these are the three broad description of overview of three major kinds of learners: visual learners, auditory learner, or kinesthetic learner. And there are ways of finding out the learning styles of people. There isn't time here in this presentation to do that, but there are ways you can check in the internet. There are ways, there are questionnaires which help you to identify your own learning style as well as that of your students. If you can do that, you can help them to come up with better ideas in the classroom to help them learn better. How is it important in the classroom? Learner diversity means that no single way of teaching works equally well for everyone. All learners in a classroom don't always benefit from traditional instruction. Although most students have a predominant way of learning, they may also have a secondary style and should be encouraged to develop it. All of us have a main style and a secondary style. You can fall back on your secondary style if there's no scope for your major style. Teachers tend to teach the way they prefer to learn. If you're a visual learner, you tend to show too many slides, too many pictures, posters, and too many objects for them to see. That should be avoided. You must consciously avoid it in the classroom by varying your instructional approaches so that you cater to learners of styles other than your own. You need to develop a collection of teaching methods that will suit all the students' learning styles some of the time. So when you're using a particular teaching method, some students learn. You move to another teaching method, some other students learn, and a third teaching method so that the other remaining students can learn. So that's why you need to vary your methods in the classroom, not only based on your topic, but also on the learning styles of your students. I'm not going to talk too much on this. You need to help your students practice active learning skills. Active listening skills. Active listening skills. Active listening simply means the student takes the responsibility for learning by giving a keen ear to whatever you're saying. They listen to you very intently. They take responsibility for learning by themselves. So you need to help students to develop the active listening skills. You need to help students in note taking by using the blackboard well or the whiteboard well. You summarize the lesson neatly in the board, and they will also be able to take that down, and then they'll be able to, over a period of time, they will be good at note-taking in the classroom. This is especially important when you have a guest lecture. Very often students will be just sitting through a guest lecture, and you can encourage them to have a notepad and then to take notes as they listen to a presenter, an industry person or a design person, and so on. Reading skills. You need to help students how to read a book. If you're looking for a particular topic, how to use the index, how to use the contents page, how to look for chapter summaries, and so on. Read the headings, check for the index. All these things you need to help students to do because they're coming out from school where they've been mostly given textbooks. So you are expecting them to go to the library and so on and learn quite a lot. Memory techniques. You can find out ways for helping them to memorize certain things you want them to remember from memory. Time management. I believe this is the most important skill. When I was introduced, there was a mention of the student's toolbox. The student's toolbox gives essential tips for how a student can manage their time besides learning, or tips on some of the skills that they can learn. So I believe students, they have a lot of time in the world, but they just don't know how to use it, especially in today's day and age when there are so many distractions in their life. There are the group learning techniques we have seen briefly, group discussion, peer coaching I mentioned, then project work, it may be minor or major, and then of course activity teams where soft skills, GD and so on. All these are techniques where students learn as a group. Now a quick run through of outcome-based education. We are only going to scratch the surface here because it's quite a deep topic and you need to delve further. In the second part of the presentation, I'll be giving you more about some aspects of outcome-based education. Okay? Now, outcome-based education is a paradigm shift in engineering education. The traditional education model focused only on the content. In the days of yore, we looked at a college, its infrastructure, its facilities and everything. And it looks at its faculty, well-qualified faculty, all that's relating to the content. We didn't focus much on the learner, except to look at the results. What are the results obtained in the examinations? How good is our admission? All these are related to the content with regard to the college. But now with outcome-based education, we talk mostly about outcomes. We look at it a little more, some more detail in the next few slides. Traditional education produced students with varying degrees of achievement levels, so they could not perform effectively at the workplace because we focused only on the content, not on the real outcomes. The real outcomes is at the workplace, where they really need to display their skills, knowledge, and attitude. OBE has changed the focus of learning institutions from the content to the learner. That's why, as I mentioned earlier, the focus is more on learner-centered instruction rather than teacher-centered instruction. You focus on encouraging students, helping students to learn by themselves. You are no longer a traditional teacher. They say that you today, in today's life, you're more of a facilitator, a guide. That's all you are. There's a saying, you're not a sage on the stage, but you're a guide on the side. That's what they say about teachers today. The basis of outcome-based education, you can see historically the chronological order in which we have moved from rigid practices to outcomes. We were talking about, I think this is an industrial practice and used a lot in industry, MBO, managed by objectives, where you decide on particular objectives, both for the management as well as the employees, and then you work on those objectives. Then we talk about results-based management. Results. When I say results, it's not just the exam results. It can be a company with their profit and loss. It can be their products and so on. All that is results. Then you move on to outcome-based education. We have been getting better and better as we move from MBO, result-based management, to outcome-based education. Basically, it's a cause and effect relationship where consists of inputs, processes, outputs, and outcomes, and finally impact. Let's look briefly at what each of them means. Input relates to your student intake, your admission, the kind of students you get, their cutoff marks, the physical resources that you have, the qualifications and experiences of your faculty, etc. All that's your infrastructure, students and faculty. That's what you have. And then that takes you to the processes, governance, process, programs, the process of teaching, learning, policies, teaching, procedures, exam procedure, admission procedure, all kinds of procedures, services, what services do you provide? All that is processes. Outputs, the exam results, graduation rates, placement rates, 90% placement, 95% graduation, and so on. All these are outputs. Number of faculty publications, that's again an output. Number of patents and faculty development activities, all these are outputs. All these are related to the content, related to this, related to that, and so on. When you talk about outcomes, you now talk about the learner side, or whatever is useful for the real world, the outside community. Student knowledge, attitude, and school skills. What have they learned and how useful they'll be to the society? With the faculty publications, what are the citations? How useful is your publication to developing research in real life? Citations of faculty publications. Success of consultancy with industry. Success of commercialization of patents. If you have some real good patents, how useful is it in real life? Have you been able to commercialize it? Has industry been able to make use of it and benefit from it? Industry feedback on graduates. How good are your graduates? Do they fit the kind of jobs that they've been selected for, or you have trained them for, or your program is preparing them for? Your GATE scores. GATE scores are for the engineering graduates. It's for getting to a higher level education like MTech and so on, IITs. So if your program is good, how good are your GATE scores? Graduate admissions, that means admission to top level institutions like IIT, NIT, and so on, or outside university like Harvard. If, for example, your students are able to get quick admission into a higher degree in Fashion Institute of Technology, New York, you have achieved a major outcome in your college. Finally, the impact, graduate status and contributions to society. How much are your graduates contributing to the society? Have they made a name for themselves, and so on? Broadly, OBE is an educational theory that bases each part of an educational system around goals. Every level of learning in a program is situated around outcomes or goals. At the end of every educational experience, there should be a goal. We talk about course outcomes at the course level, program outcomes at the program level, and then program-specific outcomes at the program level, program-specific objective, educational objectives at the career level. So these are various levels. So there is no single specified style of teaching or assessment in OB. Instead, classes, opportunities, and assessment should help the students achieve the specified outcomes. You need to tailor your classes, you need to create the opportunities, and you design your assessments to help students achieve the outcomes that will be useful for the real world. So the role of faculty, as I mentioned earlier, adapts into instructor, trainer, facilitator, and mentor based on the outcomes targeted. Benefits are, OB is capable to measure the students, what students are capable of performing, rather than the percentage of marks that they have got in the examination. So that was a result That was the content of your college. That gave a name to your college. But what can give you more name is what your students are really capable of performing. Outcome-based education is not interested in content, but more so in the context in which lends the relevancy to the content itself. If a content is important, how relevant it is to the outside world is really more important than the content itself. Outcome-based education goes beyond the structured tasks of memorization by demanding a student demonstrate his or her skills through more challenging tasks like designing and project building. How much can your student do with real life situations, cases, and real time problems is really important. Thus, OB involves students in a complete course of learning from developing their skills in designing to completing a whole process. So these are the basic features of OBE. I spoke about these course level course outcomes, program level, these two, program specific outcomes, program outcomes, and PEOs or the program educational objectives. Now, let's quickly look at what are the program planning steps. When you come up with a new program, how do you plan your program with regard to outcome-based education? You need to have a program vision. You need to have a program mission. Program mission is what you see, what you visualize as the program is going to do with your graduates. What you see your graduates doing when the program is completed, that's a program vision. And what steps or what action are you going to take in order to realize that vision? So that will be the program mission. Program constituencies are the stakeholders. You need to be in continuous touch with your stakeholders, even through the process of developing a vision, mission, and the PEOs, POs, and so on. So you need to identify your stakeholders and then to get through the process. Program outcomes and program specific outcomes are the knowledge, skills, and attitude and discipline related specific abilities that students are to demonstrate at the end of the program. Then once you have these ready, you can develop your program curriculum or your list of courses. Once that is ready, for each of the courses, you develop course outcomes, which indicate the teacher expectations of what students should be able to do at the end of instruction for the course. As a teacher, you can decide that in discussion with some industry people. And once the course outcomes are decided, you decide the course outcome. Very often, we have a ready-made curriculum and syllabi available. So, based on courses that are being offered elsewhere. So, you always have a program ready, a curriculum and syllabi. But if you're going to develop a new program from the scratch, this would be the real process. You start with your program vision and you end with your syllabi. Now, when you want to assess, the students have gone through your program and you want to now assess your students. How do you do it? You follow the reverse style. You start from this end and go upwards, go back. So you need to first do the assessment of course outcomes. You can use the direct methods of assessment. Direct methods are methods like the test, practical lab classes, the lab exams, the tests and vivas. All these are direct methods where you have discrete questions and marks for them, and then each student gets marks, and then that's direct. Assessment of POs. Once you have done that, you can do the POs. You can do it by indirect means as well. What is indirect? Getting student feedback on how well they think they have achieved the outcomes for the course. So they give their feedback, they give their perceptions of how well they have achieved the outcomes. So that plus the direct method, you assess course outcomes, program outcomes, and the PEOs. This also by only indirect method. You can't conduct a test because this is usually done 5 years when they are into their career, after 5 years of industry experience or work experience. So it can be done only through feedback from your alumni and from your employers. Then evaluation of the program. which means what do from all this, do you find any drawbacks in your program? And then you need to sit there and discuss what changes you want to make in the program and come to certain decisions. Finally, you come at the revised program. So this is how outcome-based education plans for a program or develops a program and creates steps for the assessment of the learning that takes place. This is a pictorial view of the whole thing. You have the course loop, you have the program loop, you have the professional world loop, the real world. And you have your constituencies or the stakeholders here. You can go through that slide yourself based on the previous information I gave you. And this is how you develop for the NBA in particular, your institutional planning, your department planning, and then your program development and assessment. It's a summary of what I've been talking earlier. So for an institution, you need to have a vision, you need to have a mission, and then you need to have goals and objectives or a plan, maybe a strategic plan for your college, which includes the goals and objectives. The departmental vision has to be in line with the college vision, and the program vision in line with that. Similarly with the missions, similarly with the plans at the different levels. And for the development of the plan, you have your PEOs, POs, PSOs, and then you have your course outcomes and your assessment of the course outcomes, and finally your decisions on program improvement. This is again a pictorial view of how you can write down or how you can develop a plan for implementing outcome-based education in your institution, in your department. Very briefly on each of these 4 or 5 terms, PEOs are the knowledge, skills, performance, abilities, capabilities that the graduates are expected to accomplish 5 years after graduation. That means at the start of the program itself, you decide what your alumni will be capable of demonstrating 5 years after their graduation. See how far ahead you're thinking and how well your program has to be planned in order for you to have successfully achieved your PEOs. You can also define them as career and professional accomplishments that a program is preparing graduates to achieve during the first 5 years after graduation. They reflect the application of what has been taught in the curriculum. Once the student has a time to contextualize, they now use the knowledge, skills, and attitude in the context of the industry or workplace, whatever it may be, taken from their undergraduate education. They should be clearly stated from the standpoint of the institution, realistic, achievable, and measurable. Program constituencies are mainly your stakeholders. They are constituting individuals, bodies, or organizations that have a stake in the process of the department or are affected by it. Anybody, it may be parents, it may be parents are not included here, it can include parents, industry, alumni, faculty, final year students. It can mean your board, your management, your management's governing body. It can mean your university, everybody is included here. All these people have a stake in your program, which means they are benefited if your program is doing well, if your students are doing well, but they are concerned if your program is not doing well and your students are not doing well in terms of results or they're not getting placed and so on. So stakeholders are very, very vital. They are the main cogs to be consulted when you're dealing with your programs. That's why we talk a lot about parents, teachers meeting, having advisory bodies, program advisory bodies, where you bring in industry people, where you bring in people from your advisory boards and so on. Your PEOs, once they are developed, they must be displayed in their college website and wherever in the different parts of your department, notice board and other places, you can display them. Students should know all these things in a outcome-based education situation. These are what we expect the students to be capable of demonstrating immediately upon graduation. They are known as the program outcomes. So at the end of the 3 years or 4 years that your program is, what do you expect them to be capable of demonstrating? Program outcomes. They relate to the skills, knowledge, and behavior that the students acquire through program. The program outcomes adopted by NBA. Of course, I need not call them because they're taken from the Washington Accord. Washington Accord is for those institutions that have NBA accreditation, and they can link themselves with overseas institutions who are also a signatory to the Washington Accord. So that makes admission into overseas institutions earlier, easier. Program outcomes are the same for all disciplines. They are common. These are program-specific outcomes that are related particularly to the discipline of your program. For example, if it is civil engineering, it will relate to civil engineering. If it's fashion technology, it's related to fashion technology. If it's interior design, it's related to interior design, and so on. They are based on the competencies of reputed professional bodies. For example, if you have a good leading professional overseas or world level global body which is recognized, they may have listed some career expectations of the skills. You can borrow some ideas from there also for developing your program specific outcomes. PSOs vary from one discipline to another, but POs are the same for all disciplines. So that completes my first part. So I'll just take a 2-minute break if you don't mind. We'll come back again in just 2 minutes. Is that okay with all of you? Yes? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Dear participant, first part is finished now. If any queries, please put up in the chat.
Please don't leave the meeting. We'll start the second part in some time.
Hello all. Can we now continue the session?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Thank you. So far we've been talking about basic pedagogical skills for teachers, which I've given you a kind of summary on. Basically, it's not going into the depth of each topic, but giving you a sort of outline of each of those skills, some of the major skills. We also mentioned very briefly about outcome-based education. With regard to outcome-based education, I'd like to mention, of course, that all institutions, whether they're going in for NBA or whether they're going in for NAC, can definitely start practicing outcome-based education, because that will definitely help these kind of institutions, the departments, to show the accreditation body that they are already in line, in the line of quality, in the line of good planning, in the line of good organized planning, and so on. So I think it will be a good idea for institutions which are not really going in for NBA, but which are also going for NAC. I would suggest it, because though NAC has not implicitly mentioned OBE, they definitely appreciate institutions that are focusing on outcomes. It need not be necessarily on the basis of NBA's pattern. It can be their own outcomes. They can have course outcomes and program level outcomes. That's fine. So now we move on to the second part, to a little finer. We go into the outcome-based education. We talk about at the course level will be. And so this is where all of you can really imbibe some more information from what I'm going to say, and perhaps practice all of that in your real lives. We'll talk first about writing course outcomes and then on the Bloom's taxonomy of instructional outcomes. How to define a course outcome. A course outcome, abbreviated as CO, is a statement that describes what the student will be able to do or demonstrate at the end of instruction, that is, at the end of teaching. So you as a teacher can decide what your student should be able to do at the end of your teaching. So that would be a course outcome. So for a given course, you can have 3, 4, 5, 6 even outcomes for a given course, depending upon how well or what precisely you want your students to be able to do or demonstrate at the end of the instruction. When you say do, what does this doing mean? It means something that is observable and accessible. You should be able to see the person doing it. For example, if you say at the end of instruction, the student will know the features of garment construction, that is not observable. The student will say, yes, I know it, that's all. And there comes an end to that matter. Instead, if you say the student should be able to explain, describe, those things are observable, and you can even assess the extent to which he's able to describe or explain the outcome. Course outcomes are statements which communicate in behavioral terms the expected performance of the students at the end of instruction. Is another definition which talks about behavior. We mentioned earlier about learning, which causes a change in behavior of students. Before learning, the student had a certain kind of behavior, and after the learning, the change, you notice a change in behavior in the student, because there is new learning on the part of the student. It can be new learning in terms of knowledge, skills, or attitude. Now, why do we need to have course outcomes? You can see we have seen the teaching, learning, or teaching or instructional system or block. I showed you an earlier diagram consisting of blocks. This is another way of representing it. You have the student input on the left-hand side here, the students entering the class. That means students who are at the start of a class. This is the knowledge that they have at the beginning of the class, entry behavior, or the behavior prior to learning, whatever you wanted to teach them. And then you have your course outcomes here. This is what you expect the students to be able to do or demonstrate at the end of your instructional process. And when this is complete, you have your student output, the terminal behavior or the behavior resulting from learning. How well have they learned? You wish to find out through the process of evaluation. So that comes as a feedback. If your evaluation is good, everything is fine, your outcomes are good, the processes are good, and you can continue with that process. But if your evaluation discovers that your students have not quite achieved your outcomes, you need to take a look at the outcomes or the process in order to help students to be able to achieve those outcomes. So your entire process that you follow in the teaching is focused on achieving those outcomes. That's why outcome-based education. So this has to be written very clearly, the outcomes. The outcomes have to be written very clearly, without any doubt. It should not be vague. And not only teachers, but also, very importantly, the students should be able to clearly understand what is expected of them at the end of the teaching process. So this is called the instructional system and the importance of course outcomes in that system. Now, in words, you can say the need for course outcomes helps three categories of people: the students, the teacher, as well as the question paper setter. For the students, the course outcomes course outcomes should be written for each course of curriculum because they specify what the student should learn to do. Specify means clearly state. Thus, outcomes serve as signposts to the students. For them, it's like targets which they must achieve with regard to their learning. I must achieve course outcome number 1, number 2, number 3, and so on. It gives each outcome is a target or a signpost which the student must pass in order to show success or demonstrate success in learning. Course outcomes help teacher because they provide direction to the teacher in the selection of the most effective instructional methods, media and resource material to be used during the instruction. And finally, of course, it helps the question paper setter to evaluate students, how well the students have learned. So if there were no course outcomes, the question paper could be a tough question paper, it could be a very easy question paper, and you as a teacher will not be very satisfied because you might feel that they are below par or above par. So, very good course outcomes, they help three sets of people: the student, teachers, and question paper setter. So the course outcome must be shared with the students and also with the question paper setter. When any learning takes place, there are three main domains by which learning takes place. So we have already seen the definition of learning is a process through which a person acquires new knowledge, skill, and attitude. The result of learning is a change in behavior of the person. COs may be categorized under any one of these learning domains. Cognitive domain, which relates to factors, theories, concepts, policies, and all those things, theories, everything related to your intellectual thinking or your head or your brain, anything relating to your thinking. All these are cognitive aspects, and when learning takes place here, it is learning in the cognitive domain. You can have learning in the psychomotor domain, where students learn new physical skills using their hands or any other part of the body. I mentioned in a chemistry class how the student uses the nose to identify the gas that is coming out of a particular chemical reaction. Or it may be an athlete or a dancer who learns how to do sprinting, or a dancer who learns how to do a particular kind of dance, how they use their hands, their feet, their body. All this is related to learning in the psychomotor domain. And then lastly, of course, the third one is affective domain, which relates to attitudes, values, beliefs, where the heart is involved. Just to create an alliteration, they have given the name of head, hands, and heart. Head related to cognitive domain, hands representing the positive psychomotor domain, and the heart representing the affective domain. Just for H, H, and H. In engineering education, the teaching learning focus, even with the fashion technology, like the courses or master's degree, MSc that you institutions and teachers are offering, the teaching learning focuses predominantly in the cognitive domain. We don't much talk about, not so much on the psychomotor domain. It would be desirable to also include the other two domains to ensure complete education. In the affective domain, when you have completed a course and you're in the affective domain of learning, the student can appreciate how important that particular course is in his life, in other people's life, and so on, and how that creates an impact in society on a whole. All that kind of learning will relate to affective domain. We don't really focus too much on that. We focus mainly on the cognitive domain. We might do a lot of learning programming on a computer, but that is also related to cognitive. You might use the keyboard for to create a program, a computer program, but you're not focusing on the extent of skill by which the keyboard is used. That would be the psychomotor domain. For example, typing speed, if you talk about, that is the psychomotor domain. And that is practiced only if you're for certain vocations, like you want to become a steno, or you want to practice very good typewriting. That would be the psychomotor domain, where you enhance your skills and get better and better. Then we can talk about types of outcomes. And here we talk about Gronland's classification of outcomes, which is very, very important here. Norman Gronland, an American, he has classified outcomes into two main types: general outcomes and specific outcomes. In the outcome-based education, we call them course outcomes for the general outcomes, and learning outcomes, we call them at Sona College, we use this word learning outcomes instead of specific outcomes. The NBA, of course, does not mention learning outcomes, nor will NAC mention that. General outcomes are broad statements that describe in implicit terms the overall aims of learning a course or a unit of a course. So the content is usually quite large. If you divide your course into, say, 5 or 6 parts or units, you might have one course outcome for each of those units. So those would be the general outcomes. So general outcomes could be for a whole course or a chapter of a book or a unit. They are macro level outcomes, they're not directly measured or assessed. That's why we have the specific outcomes. If you want to assess a general outcome, you express the general outcomes in terms of more specific terms, which we call specific outcomes. And by assessing these, you can assess your general outcomes. This is what we do for the NBA when we talk about assessing our course outcomes. I've given an example of environmental science, general outcomes for environmental science. Unit 1, to enable students to state the importance of the acute need for environmental awareness and discuss significant aspects of these items, forests and so on up to land resources. So it's a very general statement. But the actual syllabus of this unit can contain something like 7 or 8 or 9 topics or even 10 topics which cover this particular unit. Similarly, the general outcome for Unit 2 is explain the concept of an ecosystem and provide an overview of biodiversity and its conservation. Here too, the syllabus might contain 8, 9, or even 10 topics, but this is what we expect for the general outcome. So it's not very specific. As the term itself says, general outcome is written in a general way. It's at the macro level. It represents a large quantity of learning. It represents a large number of topics. When you move on to specific outcomes are expressed in behavioral terms and identify the end outcome of instruction of a topic in terms of observable performance of the students. So as I said, when you have your first unit, you have, say, 10 topics. For each of those topics might have 1, 2, or 3 specific outcomes. It can have 1. It may have even 2. You may want them to define the topic. You may want them to explain the topic. You may want them to describe a process related to the topic and so on. So for each topic, you can have even 2, 3, or 4, or it can even be 1. So definitely, you can have a minimum of anything. If you have 10 topics, you can have anything between 10 to 20 specific outcomes, whereas you have only one general outcome there. So when these 10 or 20 outcomes, specific outcomes have been achieved, you can say that your general outcome has been achieved. Their micro level outcomes that are measured or assessed. A list of specific outcomes clarify a given general outcome and are accepted as evidence of attainment of the general outcome. At SONA, we call them learning outcomes or LOs. Let us see examples of specific outcomes of the general outcome we stated for Unit 1 in ES, Environmental Science. So there we said, what did we say there? We said, state the importance of the acute need for environmental awareness and discuss the significant aspects of natural resources like forests, water, mineral, food, energy, and land resources. So we take each of these items and then we split them into specific outcomes. Define environmental science and engineering and state its scope and importance and explain why there is an urgent need for public awareness of environmental issues. Outline the uses and overexploitation of the Earth's forest resources and discuss issues like forest deforestation, timber extraction, pros and cons of dams in forest areas with case studies, and so on. You talk about surface and groundwater, you talk about mineral sources, you talk about food problems, you talk about energy, you talk about land resources. All these were just mentioned as 1 or 2 words in your general outcome, but for each of these you are specifying what should be discussed and what should be stated, examples should be given, and so on. So these are specific outcomes. There are 7 in number. You can have even 10, you can have 15 too, depending upon what you as a teacher expect the students to be able to do at the end of learning for instruction in Unit 1. When you come to the specific objective or specific outcome, there is a method for writing the specific outcome, and this is what we are going to focus on here because it's going to be of benefit to all of you as teachers. Specific outcomes, the learning outcome must be well defined, concise, and precise. Robert Major gives a very complete way of writing specific learning outcomes or learning outcome, which he calls behavioral outcomes. He has used another term because it relates to behavior. It relates to the student doing something that is visible or accessible. It relates something to students' change in behavior. According to Major, according to Mager, a learning outcome should include the following 3 components: a performance element, a conditions element, and a criteria element. The performance element, it should be performed by the learner and indicated by an action verb. We'll see what's the difference between an action verb and other kinds of verbs that are vague verbs. Conditions under which the learner must perform the performance. Conditions under which he or she must demonstrate the learning. That you can specify if you wish to do so. You can have only this one. You can have the conditions as well. You can also include a criteria. See, as a teacher, you like your students to be able to do so much with a given topic, so you decide what's to be done. So criteria, it's the quality aspect by which the performance is evaluated by another. Or in other words, how well the learner must perform the performance. What are the quality aspects? How much time? So it can be a time element or it can be an accuracy element and so on. Mager admits that in some cases it is not always necessary to include the second characteristic. Not always necessary. The second, and not always practical to include the third. It might put too much pressure on the learner to include the third. But he goes on to say that the more you say about the characteristics or the elements, the better your objective or outcome will communicate. So the idea is to write a clear one so that the learner knows that this is what I must do in order to be able to achieve the outcome. Let's look at examples. One example I like to give you here is compute the standard deviation using a given set of data. So just a few words, hardly 10 words here is the learning outcome or the specific outcome. The performance or behavior element is the student will be able to compute the standard deviation. Action verb is compute. You can see the person computing, you can assess it. So anything that is visible, observable, and accessible is an action verb. Condition, using a given set of data. You already mentioned using a given set of data. You could always have said, compute the standard deviation using assumed data. That means the student assumes some data and then he can compute the standard deviation for that data. But here you want to give the data yourself, so that's a condition. Criterion, it's implied here. It's not mentioned, but it's implied the SD computed will be correct. When you want students to calculate a numerical value, you don't generally tell them the answer should be correct. It's implied. So the three elements are there. Definitely two are visible and one is, of course, not specifically mentioned, but it's implied. Remember that Major said you may not always need to add conditions. He suggests using them if they make things more clear and remove ambiguity. It's always preferable to ensure clarity than have ambiguity in a learning outcome. Some more examples here. I'm not going to read through them, but I'm highlighting the action verbs in all of them. All these are action verbs because they are visible, observable, and measurable or accessible. Avoid vague verbs to start with an outcome, to start an outcome. Verbs that are not readily observed or assessed are best avoided. Know, understand, study, experience, feel, enjoy, perceive, be aware of, realize. So when you're writing an outcome, you imagine what you'll be able to see or evaluate when the student has completed the task that you have assigned. So you'll easily be able to avoid these kind of words because they are not observable. When a classroom and the teacher says, can all of you understand what I'm saying? Yes, teacher, we understand, but that's not really an action verb. When you want to evaluate them, you use verbs like define, explain, and describe, compute, analyze, devise, and so on. When you write outcomes, you avoid cramming too much into any one outcome. You avoid being too vague. You avoid being overly specific. Because even as a teacher, you'll not know whether the outcome has been achieved or not. Because there are so many criteria mentioned. Now, there are some 6 rules for writing specific objectives. Very quickly, let's go through them. Specific outcome should state in terms of the learner's performance and not the teacher's performance. Bad example, teach Beasley's method for determination of yarn count. Teach, it may be an action verb, but it's not referring to the learner. It relates to the teacher's performance, which you should avoid. A better example is explain Beasley's method for the determination of yarn count. Going to the next rule. The mere mention or description of subject matter should not be avoided. For example, if you say, my course outcome is, my specific outcome is pattern creation with CAD tools. It doesn't make much sense because this looks like a topic. You're merely mentioning the subject matter. You have to mention the performance element. And this is the task related to that performance. What do you wish the student to do with this? You wish the student to create patterns, to give in specifications. See, you put a condition here. You want to give specifications. Create patterns to give in specifications using CAD software for men's shirts. So this is very specific. Rule number 3, use action verbs. I mentioned it. Bad example, know the features of lock stitch sewing machine. This is not measurable nor observable. Better example, describe the parts of a lock stitch sewing machine and show how it can be threaded. This is a measurable outcome. Rule number 4, state the outcome in terms of a learning outcome instead of a learning process. Remember what the student should be able to do or demonstrate at the end of learning, and not what the student uses to learn, the process, the steps. Bad example, the student gains knowledge about a fabric strength tester. Not good because this is a part of the learning process. Better example, explain the working principle of stated tensile tester. Stated means, here again, in the question, in the examination, you might specify a particular tensile tester. That's why explain the specific working principles of stated tensile testers and describe how they can be used to determine fabric strength is a better example. Rule number 5, specify the standards of minimum acceptable performance. This again, we come to Mager's third criterion, which is the quality aspect. You may or may not have it. So at least 4 or 5 of the rules, if you apply, it's good enough. Particularly this one is not compulsory. The first 4 are. For example, here, if you say the student will be able to distinguish between metals and non-metals, you don't know. Some students might give you one difference or 2 differences. Some might give you 4 or 5 differences and so on. So the better way would be to say list any 6 differences between metals and non-metals. So you're specifying the level to which the standard of minimum acceptable performance there. Below 6, you're not happy. 6 and above, you're happy. Similarly, determine the diameter of a given rod. You want to put a criterion element there. For quality, you can say determine the diameter of a given rod using the given device. Here's a condition. And here's Mager's third element, to an accuracy of 0.05 mm. That is the third element. So if you really wish your students to do very well, and you think your instructional process has been matched, whatever you expect them to do, then by all means you can give them outcomes of this kind. And finally, an outcome should not consist of more than 1 or 2 learning outcomes, preferably 1, but if possible 2. Here, 2 learning outcomes: explain the need for networking, list the types of networking, and discuss, explain, list, and discuss. There are 3 learning outcomes there. So better would be to put it down into 2 outcomes. Explain why networks are needed and list any 2 types of networking. So you're giving 2 outcomes instead of 1. Because there'll be too many outcomes to evaluate and then to check whether the student has achieved or not. This is for specific outcomes, so it's good. So these are the 6 rules that you need to kind of follow. And as I said, the 5th one, the criterion one, the quality one, you may or may not give. That brings us to the last topic of the day, which I'll quickly give you an idea of. Bloom's taxonomy of instructional objectives or outcomes. Before we get to that actual point, let's differentiate between information and instruction. Information is simply telling something to someone, telling someone something. So merely passing on information, whereas instruction is, the aim is to change the behavior of a person. You want to make sure to what extent the student has imbibed your learning by changing in behavior. And this behavior we have seen earlier is any observable activity performed by the person. This we have already seen. I don't want to repeat it. It's just to remind you of the importance of instructional outcomes in this teaching model. Course outcomes, also the definition we have seen, so I'm not going to repeat it. It's just to refresh your mind. Yeah, and this also we have seen why course outcomes are important. They're important for the student, the teacher, and equally to the question paper setter. It is central to these 3 categories of people. This also we have seen. All these are just a quick refresher before we get to the Bloom's taxonomy. Head, heart, and hands, knowledge, attitude, and skills, cognitive domain, affective domain, and psychomotor domain. And now this is the real part. Bloom's taxonomy. Benjamin Bloom, in the year 1956, he came up with the theory that learning or outcomes can be cognitive. So the cognitive domain of learning can be subdivided into 6 subdomains. And those 6 subdomains can be classified in a hierarchical order, as shown here. The lowest level is knowledge, the first level. These are shown like steps in order to signify the hierarchy and to signify the fact that you can't get to the step 2 unless you get to step 1. You first finish knowledge, then you go to comprehension, then you go to application, then you go to analysis, then you go to synthesis, and finally to evaluation. So these are the 6 levels in this order, from knowledge to evaluation. The lower 2 levels are called, the lower 2 levels of learning are called lower order thinking skills or lots. It means lots, but we are at the lower order thinking. Whereas the 4 upper levels, from application through to evaluation, they are the intellectual thinking skills or the higher order thinking skills or the HOTS. So when you think in terms of teaching, you need to ensure that students are learning to as high a level as possible. So your outcomes need to be written at as high a level as you want your student to get to. And similarly, your evaluation questions for assessing the extent to which the outcomes have been achieved must also be from knowledge through to the level you want them to achieve. So this is very, very important. Let's quickly look at each of these levels. Knowledge is simply remembering previously learnt material, memorizing. Anything that the students recalls from memory is related to the knowledge level. Comprehension is the next level, which means grasping the meaning of material. It can mean translation. If you have understood something well, you can convert it from one form to another form. Convert the matter or the learning from one form to another, from one language to another. It can mean interpreting, explaining or summarizing material, writing something in your own words, summarizing something in your own words. That is interpretation. Extrapolation, finding meaning in between lines. That means you have understood everything, so are able to add to something that's not explicitly mentioned or stated in the part of learning, but which you have extrapolated beyond your learning. So extending the meaning beyond the data that's given. The third level is application, refers to the ability to use learned material in new and concrete situations. If you have shown in a particular class, you have shown how to draw patterns for a given garment, and in the examination, you give them the same garment and you ask the student to be able to draw the patterns. You will not be testing the student at the application level. You will be testing them at the comprehension level because you're not giving them a new situation or a concrete situation which the student has never come across. Application is always applying your learnt material in a new or concrete situation. Understand? So this must include application of such things as rules, methods, concepts, principles, laws, theories, and solving of problems. Anything related to whatever you teach. If you want them to apply it, the situation given has to be something different, something new. Analysis is the fourth level, breaking down material into its parts. Analysis of elements, identifying parts. You can give a machine, you can ask them to identify your parts. You can give them a new garment and ask them to identify the parts or the patterns. So they would be at the analysis level. Analysis of relationships, how the parts are related to each other. That also you can include, comes under analysis. And how the analysis of organizational principles, how the parts are organized in order to form a complete composite unit. How they're organized. For example, you talk about creation of patterns. You need to have patterns in a particular order, in a particular way, a manner, in order to get a particular garment. So how these parts are organized. So these are the three subsections of analysis. Then synthesis, the fifth level, putting parts together into a whole. For example, when you write your master's theses, you have a lot of material, you have surveyed literature, you have different parts of whatever you have learned. You want to put all of that together in the form of a thesis. And when you successfully do that, you are at the synthesis level. Production of a unique communication, complete communication, production of a plan or proposed set of operations, derivation of a set of abstract relations, all these related to the synthesis. When you have certain parts and then you're able to create a new whole, it should be a new design, a new plan, a new proposed set of operations and so on. It should not be something that's already existing. That would be at the synthesis level. Evaluation. This is judging the value of a thing for a given purpose using a sound knowledge base and definite criteria. If, for example, somebody else has designed a garment and you as an expert review it, examine it to find how well it's been designed, you would be, and you're able to do it successfully, you would be at the evaluation level. You can even evaluate your own design to find out whether it contains all the elements that you had planned it should contain. There are some typical action verbs that have been suggested in the literature for Bloom's cognitive levels, and they can be used for writing cognitive instructional outcomes at the cognitive level. As I said, there's the lower level of learning, and these are the intellectual skills, knowledge, recalling important information, define, repeat, record, list, recall, name, etc. All these verbs can be used in your outcome. If you want the student to be at the knowledge level, these are the verbs you use. If you want your outcome to be at the comprehension level, translate, restate, discuss, describe, recognize, explain, and so on. Application, solve close-ended problems. Interpret, apply, employ, use, demonstrate, etc. Analysis, solving open-ended problems, distinguish, analyze, differentiate, appraise. All this relates to analysis. Some words may be repeated. For example, appraise comes here and appraise comes here. And as a teacher, it depends on what importance you give to this appraise. If you want the student to be at the level of analysis, it will be at the analysis level. If you want him to be at the evaluation level, it can be used at the evaluation level. Synthesis, creating unique answers to problems. Unique is something new, something different, something which only you have produced. Compose, plan, propose, design, formulate, arrange, assemble, collect, and so on. And finally, evaluation, judge, appraise, evaluate, rate, compare, revise, assess, estimate. So you can use all of these verbs appropriately to your particular specific outcomes, but please don't use all of them for your questions. Many of these words, maybe the students don't understand the meaning of. They're not used for questions. When you want to evaluate the student. For questions, use very simple words, but the level can be any of these 6 levels. Now, here's an example I'm giving you of my maths and Inkles of the 6 levels. So let's look at mathematics. You will be at the knowledge level if you write an outcome saying, state the formula for the area of a circle. It's memory. You would be at the comprehension level if you tell the student to paraphrase in his or her own words a given mathematical formula. For example, if you say pi r squared and you say paraphrase it, the student has to write or describe that formula in terms of words, in his or her own words. And how well they are able to do it describes how well they have achieved the comprehension level. Application, compute the area of actual circles. You give them the radius or the diameter, and then you ask them to calculate the area of a circle. They will be at the application level. And here again, don't give the values you used in the classroom. Give them new values. Similarly, for English, knowledge level, recite a poem is from memory. Explain a poem. Identify metaphors used in the poem. It's a figure of speech that you want the students to identify in the poem. So they will be demonstrating how well they know or identify metaphors, and they'll be applying that knowledge. More at the 3 further levels in mathematics. Determine the strategies you would be necessary to solve a given word problem in mathematics. You give a word problem and you ask the student to find out the various ways by which the problem can be solved. So that's analysis. Apply and integrate the various strategies to solve a mathematical problem. If the student is able to find out various ways of doing it and apply those ways to solve the problem, he would be at the synthesis level, he or she. Then, of course, you have demonstrated the degree to which a problem you have finished solving or a peer has done so to solve it efficiently. So here you are evaluating somebody else's work, and then you are at the evaluation level. Similarly with the English, you can read through the examples. If the student can write his or her own poem, if they have created their own essay or a poem or a blog, they are at the synthesis level. And if they're able to analyze their own poem or a peer's essay or poem for various things they have learned for writing, they would be at the evaluation level, and so on. Here is another example. Here I'm giving you 6 outcomes that are written. And if you can take a couple of minutes just to identify what level of Bloom's taxonomy does each of them fall. You can try it out, but I'm going to give you the answers right now. You can try them out later and confirm how well you have learned, because we are running out of time actually now. I have only a few minutes left for completing the program. The first one is knowledge, because it's recall. The second one, of course, is at the application level, because you're asked them to write an outcome by themselves using something that they have learned. The third is at the comprehensive level, because you're talking about explaining something. And here you're writing plans and so on. So you're there at the synthesis level. And here you're at the analysis, evaluation level, and last one is at the analysis level. You can check out the details yourself, and then the better you understand this explanation here, the better you'll be able to really understand differentiating between one level and another for your own outcomes. Now, Bloom's taxonomy first came in the year 1956, I mentioned. But in the year 2001, one of Bloom's students, Lauren Anderson, in association with another expert, a senior expert, who has also worked with Bloom, Krathwohl, they have revised the levels of Bloom's levels, cognitive learning. This is the original that we have just seen. This is the revised one. They say the level should be remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. They have converted the noun form in Bloom's original taxonomy to the verb forms. Sometimes I've seen some lists where they actually use the action verbs. They say remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create, using the direct verbs themselves, action verbs themselves. So these are the two differences that are there. The second difference relates to the change. They have taken evaluation and put it to the fifth level, and taken synthesis and put it to the highest level. So evaluating comes at the fifth level, and instead of synthesizing, they call it creating. Anderson and Krathwohl felt that a person would be at the highest level of learning if they're able to create something new, which is not in existence at all. They create something totally new. They're at the highest level of learning. This is a pictorial representation of the old and the revised. These are still used by some institutions, but many institutions have moved to this level. Noun form to the verb form. Okay, here what I've done is, I've given you some tips for writing questions to evaluate students and moving from the traditional to the situation-based questions, as I call it, in order to get at higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy of application and so on. Here, for example, it's at the C level. Explain how a given fabric may be singed with a neat diagram. You give them a situation and then make them think. Rather than mentioning singeing, you make them think. How would you make a dull-looking fuzzy gray fabric appear smooth and bright by means of a chemical-free process? So here the student has to go through his entire learning to first identify the machine. That would be application, and then explain what singeing is all about. This is another form of writing the same question where it gives the situation. Similarly, I have given some more examples for the soft flow dyeing machine, where there's a directly you're mentioning the machine, but here I'm not mentioning the machine. The student has to lean back on his learning in order to identify the machine and then apply his knowledge to that new situation. There are two more examples here which I would leave you to learn by yourselves. So I think we have come to the end of my presentation, and in this second session we have seen basically what are course outcomes and what are two major ways of classifying outcomes. One we have seen, of course, is the Mager's method for specific objectives. One is the Gronland's method for classification of objectives into general objective and general objective and specific objectives. Thereafter, we have seen 6 rules for writing the specific objectives, and we have shown you many examples of objectives, learning objectives. Then we have moved on to Bloom's taxonomy, and we have seen what are the 6 levels, how they are important, why there's a hierarchy in the learning, and how students should move from one level to other, and so on, and how a student at a high level, it is assumed that once he's at that level, it is assumed that he's accomplished or achieved all the lower levels coming before them. So that's why they call it the hierarchy of learning, and how they are important and how they enhance student learning to various levels. So I would like to, if there are questions, I would like to take the question, I'd like to hand over the session to the organizers so that they can organize
Thank you.
some question and answer session if required. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your kind
Thank you.
words.
Thank you.
There is a question from
Yes.
Nitya Prakash Venkataswamy. Assessment
Okay.
of analysis cognitive abilities requires time. Define scope in project form. Are any discrete methods or course methodology that shall require a lesser time?
For assessing. Yeah, obviously, to assess outcomes, it will take time. I said that for a given course, you have a lot of content and you divide the course into discrete parts or units, and then you end up with something like 5 or 6 or even 7 course outcomes. In order to be able to assess that outcome, you need to be able to complete the instruction of all the topics or units related to those particular outcomes so that you can assess them. And when we want to assess the course as a whole, you need to complete the instruction of the whole course. That means you need to come to the end of the semester in order to be able to assess the course. And in assessment, of course, as you all may be knowing, there are 2 ways of assessing. One is the formative assessment, where as the student is learning, that is through the process of the course, delivering the course, you can assess how much the student had learned. For example, you complete unit 1, you assess student learning through a test. Then you go to test unit number 2, you assess his learning and so on. So you have a formative assessment whereby you're able to find out ways by which students are displaying the extent to which they have learnt whatever you have taught them. So if there is some course correction needed to be done, that can be done during formative assessment. The summative assessment comes at the end of the semester. So evaluation does take time. And when we talk about course outcome, that is the quickest. You can do that within a particular semester. If you talk about program outcomes, it needs 3 years or 4 years for the program to be completed in order for you to be able to assess them. So assessment obviously will take time. But if you're looking at a particular topic and you have an outcome, you can assess it immediately in the next class. You teach a topic, you tell them the outcome, you teach the topic, and the next class you announce the test. You can evaluate that outcome immediately. So it depends upon the extent to which that outcome is related to, the extent of content that the outcome is related to. I agree, assessment takes a lot of time and planning. It has to be done very systematically. Even assessment is done very systematically in the outcome-based assessment. Okay?
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
On behalf of NSFTID, we once again thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation and detailing on the topic outcome-based education. A feedback link is shared in the chat box. Please fill the
Okay.
feedback form. It will be active only for 10 to 15 minutes. This information is for the participants.
Okay.
Kaushik sir, good
Yeah.
evening.
Good
Excellent
evening.
session again. And I think I
Thank
was
you very much.
fortunate enough to listen to you again. And
Thank you
I
very
think
much.
all the teachers are benefited by this because this is the need of the hour. And I think a
Yeah.
junior teacher really requires this as this is an eye opener, I suppose,
Yeah.
and very beneficial. Thank you so much from the bottom of my
Thank you very
heart.
much. Thank you.
And through my
Thank you very much.
management also, I would like to thank you.
Yeah.
And I think,
Yes.
sir, I'll keep in touch with you so that we could
Please
discuss
do.
upon various other.
Yes, yes. As I mentioned earlier, ma'am, thank you very much for your comments. As I mentioned
Yeah,
earlier, this is an overview, and
yeah,
my method of presentation is usually face to face. I've done a number
yes,
of workshops face to face, and this is my
yes,
first experience, or in fact, second experience online. I'm not really
yes,
comfortable with it because I can hardly see the participants, look at their body language, and look at
yes,
how much they're interested in what I'm saying. It's like a monologue from start to
yes,
finish, and I'm not at all comfortable with that. How I wish we come back to the days when we can have face-to-face live sessions where we can have
yes,
more activities and
yes,
more learning can take place. Yes. So in any case, I'm getting used to online learning, and I might be available for even. Well, if you take one of these topics, I might prepare some material for a given topic and have sessions for online workshops and so on. We can try out that
sure,
method if it is possible in the
Sh-
future.
sure,
I'll
sir,
definitely
sure.
keep in touch with you,
I
ma'am.
think,
Thank you very much
yes,
for everything.
the day, yeah, the day is not far off. I think we will be able to connect with each other and see each other, because that is what is very important. And
Sure.
sir, thank you so much. Stay safe.
Thank you very
Stay
much.
safe, sir. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you
you,
very
ma'am.
much.
On behalf of NSFTID, I also thank our principal, ma'am, and all the faculty members who supported for this virtual faculty development program. As we come to an end of the day 3 FTP, I would like to thank speakers of all the 3 sessions and the participants for spending your valuable time with us and making the third day FTP a success, and would be happy to see you all on Monday's session. Thank you all. Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye.